Kristine Samuelson and John Haptas. Wow. Let's just start at the beginning. This is, like I said at the beginning, a story I don't think a lot of us knew about. And we've heard a lot about, the refugee crisis overseas and the immigration situation here and how it affects kids. We've heard a lot of different kinds of stories, but I've never seen one like this. So how did you find this story?
Well, we actually read about it in an article, and it just struck us that it seemed like something beyond imagining. And I mean, how do we really live in a world where this happens to children? So we thought, this is sort of encapsulates the, situation with refugees and this disconnect between people having all these people come to their countries and then they don't really understand them. They just seem like, there's silos that keep people very separated. And we felt this was a way to possibly not only talk about the illness, but also to show these real people who are going through these real struggles. So I went over to Sweden to meet a couple of people involved in the story, stayed with them, and went and visited some families, just a little bit of a scout. Came back, John and I talked, and we decided we would try to get access. Access was not a simple thing. And it took a few months, and then we took off. We went to Sweden 5 times for a total of about 3 months. And of course, building trust with the families took time. And we only had one family at first, then we got another, and then another, and ultimately followed them all for about a year.
So when you say access wasn't easy, you mean just getting the trust of the families, or?
Well, I think it was a couple things. I think one thing is that there are volunteer doctors that are usually associated with an NGO that work with these families. And they are quite understandably very protective because they need protection. They need a lot of help. So we needed to work with them, which made a whole lot of sense. And then once we were introduced to some families, we were introduced to one family first, and then this is how it goes, and then another, and then we ended up actually filming with 4 families and having 3 in the film. But we had the additional necessity of forming some sort of trust, a bond with these families. And the way we could do that is we had a lot of time. We were doing pretty much everything ourselves. We were a crew of 2. And therefore, we didn't have to have like a crew stashed in a motel waiting to run in and do a shoot or, book something for 1 week. So we spent probably a total of about 100 days in Sweden over the course of probably a year, going back 5 different trips. And I think that what that enabled us to do was to spend a lot of time with the families. We would just spend time. We'd often go there and not shoot. We just drink coffee, maybe cookies. I brought some magic tricks and did those. The siblings loved them. The parents loved them too. And I think the critical element was time. We were able to spend the time, and we spent the time, and I think that was really key.
Were there any moments while you were filming where you thought one of the kids might actually wake up?
No. Partly because it doesn't work that way. At some point they do open their eyes, but it takes such a long time, and if they do it, it's almost like they're kind of trying to blink. We did see a little bit of that, of this kind of fluttering, but never, that goes on for months. And so we pretty much assumed we were not going to get an aha moment of a child awakening, because they really don't awaken like that. It's very, very slow and gradual. And of course, and the last thing, of course, is the speech, when they start to speak again, and also to walk. So we didn't expect that. Daria was our first child that we spent time with, and with her family, and she was the first, because they got the residency, we were able to follow. We have a lot of footage of her in this gray area of recovering. But ultimately, when we put it all together, it just didn't fit, so we left those parts out.
So speaking of leaving things out, you do a really great job of just keeping the audience focused on the resignation syndrome and the refugee crisis. A lot of documentary filmmakers would be tempted to throw in news footage to put everything in context, but you stayed away from that. Was there other editorial decisions like that had to be considered?
Well, you're really going right to the heart of how we tried to approach this, because first of all, we thought that, like every documentarian, we wanted to find a small story to tell a larger story. And we felt that for it to be, and this we thought was it, because when a family is under stress, it's not as evident as it is in this particular story where you have the children fall into this condition. And we decided that we wanted to tell an emotional story. So we did not want to go down the rabbit hole of the many, many theories about what's going on, what causes it, why in Sweden, how do you treat them best. We wanted the viewer to connect with the families. We thought that the emotional connection would be most likely to let the film do some good in the world by making people, think about the larger refugee issues. So we thought quite a bit about how to approach it. We actually had an archival sequence that we cut. We did research, we got news footage, we cut it in, and then we thought, this doesn't fit in this film at all. So we took it all out. We decided we were not going to have experts on camera. We were only going to have the parents privileged with being seen on camera while they were talking. And so we came up with some rules that we thought would serve the purpose of trying to make the film emotional, to connect the viewer with the family. And those rules were to use very wide lenses, to do long shots, to not do many edits. And there's no music in the film. We decided we would try and not use a lot of cinematic devices to lessen what's interposed between the viewer and the families. And that was the way we approached making the film.
Just want to tell everyone there's a microphone here if you guys want to step up and ask questions. But there is that opening shot, and I think it recurs again later, that beautiful overhead shot of the snow and the trees and the black lake going. It's a beautiful, black and white shot that you have there. And I'm wondering what went into the idea for that shot.
Sure. Well, that was a very interesting evolution, actually, because when we decided not to film these experts and only to record them on audio, that immediately places us in a situation of having to have some material to put with these voices, and we weren't going to use very much anyway. And we met a Swedish cinematographer who's a friend of a friend, and not knowing anything about his recent work, we learned that he had gone to northern Sweden and was doing a piece for some kind of a natural, history visitors center there, and they had wanted drone cinematography, and he was, like most of us, like many filmmakers, like most documentarians, we all are already completely tired of drone shots. They go really a cliche. But the way he did it was something a bit special, we felt. And so we sat with him and we looked at some of his shots, and we felt that they could really work in the film and also give the audience a break from being in these little claustrophobic apartments and actually step back, and that might make it easier for them to hear also what these medical people were saying.
I'm sorry, do you have a question?
Yes. Congratulations on distribution. I feel like I have sort of a love-hate relationship with my Netflix account because it's so much content and it seems like there's so little, but this is going to be a great addition there. I've enjoyed seeing shorter form stuff coming to Netflix, and you guys have a piece of media here that's an interesting length because it's a long short film. What kind of challenges? I mean, you talked about cutting out stuff. Did you have even shorter cuts of this to try and make it a more marketable short film? What kind of challenges did you have at presenting the story you wanted to in the time that you did?
Well, boy, there's a lot of interesting points you're making here. I mean, I understand love-hate Netflix, but I will say that for us, Netflix was great because we didn't have funding to finish the film. We started making the film by renting out our house and going to Sweden. And we were able to finish the film because Netflix came on board at the end, at about fine cut stage. You know, that was really great. As far as length goes, I don't know. I don't think we've ever really tried to hit a length when we've made films. And on this one, we didn't. We weren't trying to hit a length. What I would say is that we found out once we started thinking about how to shoot it and realizing what there was to shoot, we felt pretty quickly that this would not sustain a feature length. I mean, you can't go from story to story and another kid walking in the park. I mean, and we thought also it would lose its power if we stretched it out. The emotional element would be diluted. So actually, I think our first cut, interestingly enough, was about 42 minutes, I think, something like that. We thought, well, that's interesting. And then, you know, our funders said, well, keep it to 40. We won't go into all that. But anyway, it ended up being, if you take off the idents, it's about 39, 30 or something like that. And that's just sort of how it came out. And we have found, and, you know, can I just not only thank you for coming out on a Sunday morning, but thank Colin and the Chicago Critics Film Festival for programming us, because, you know, we can understand, and we've heard explicitly from a couple festivals, you know, it's really hard to program a 40-minute film. It's this sort of odd length. But that's how we got there. And just to add one more thing, and I'll stop, is I think one of the good things about streaming services, you know, taking more material now, showing more films, is I think it's moving the constraints of time around documentaries and other films as well, narrative films, because they don't have to be either really short or a feature. You know, you can have like 37 minutes or 51 minutes, because on the streaming service, they don't care and the viewers don't care. So I think it's going to loosen things up.
That seems to be a common response from filmmakers about Netflix is, I mean, even Alfonso Cuarón, who made Roma last year, was saying Netflix, this movie wouldn't exist without Netflix. So, you know, they're not the new media devil that we all have to be afraid of. You know, even if it is overflowing with content and you can't keep up, they're doing a lot of good for filmmakers as well.
Can I just add one quick
Sure.
thing about the fact that this film is on Netflix is wonderful for the families and for other refugee families in Sweden, because many more people will see it in Sweden that wouldn't have seen it otherwise. And I think we're hoping very much that this is going to move the needle a little bit on how Sweden deals with refugees. And without Netflix, this wouldn't have happened.
Thanks. Sorry, I had to ask a question because coming to the Music Box on Sunday to talk about Netflix is like my version of purgatory. I was wondering, the film sort of takes the broad strokes of the medical science part of this. And I was wondering if there's anything that you learned that you left out of the film about the scientific side of it that really struck you.
Yeah, well, you know, we set out not to make a medical mystery. And part of the reason that we did that was because there are many countervailing theories and opinions about what causes this. Why does it happen to a particular kind of child? Well, does it happen to a particular kind of child? There's so little that's been done to cohesively organize it. We actually felt that the hardest part was that the families have been coming from these parts of the world, these particular parts of the world, as the doctor says in the film. He says from the Baltics, from the former Soviet republics, or they're ethnic minorities like Roma or Yazidi or Uyghur. Why? And, you know, it has been posited, this is the thing I found most interesting, it has been posited that the culture, that the way the family culture is in these particular places or in these particular subgroups, somehow in being in Sweden, there's a bit of a collision in some way that makes the children a little bit more vulnerable to this. On the other hand, lots of kids don't get this. I mean, usually it's just one child in a family, and it's very few families. Yes, there are over 200 kids in the last 3 years that have come down with this, but there's thousands and thousands. I mean, Sweden takes a lot of refugees, and it's, in my view, actually pretty laudable, except that now it's become much more difficult and it takes a lot longer. And I think the length of the time of the suffering of the families waiting there on pins and needles for such a long time, it's really torture.
Yeah, I would just add that, we read a lot of these, we read some articles, medical articles, that we could barely decipher, not being medical people. But one of the terms that kept coming up was multifactorial. And the more I thought about that, and the more we got into this, we realized that that's really descriptive, because there are so many disparate elements that come together to make this happen. Why one child in the family and not the other? It's like just a little predisposition or some other little tiny factor just pushes them in. And then the other thing I would say that we found out and found very interesting, clearly this is a psychosomatic condition. And we've been reading things about like the diplomats in Cuba. Is that a psychosomatic condition, or is it something else? It's really interesting, but this is clearly somehow a response to stress and trauma that's expressed in a very particular way. And other than that, we can give you, that's why we didn't want to get into expert interviews. We talked to 5 people and we get 5 theories. And we thought, we're not going there.
Hi. So in the film we see that Dasha's family gets their residency, and so it's like she's able to recover, and that's like, and it's nice to see that for the family, but the other 2 families we are kind of left with uncertainty. Are they still in that situation now?
Well, actually, we can report some good news, which is Karan, the boy, has opened his eyes. He first, about 10 weeks ago, he opened his eyes very fleetingly, but now they're open a lot more. So they've got him lying on the couch, kind of aware, not really turning his head around, but his eyes are open, and if you squeeze his hand now, he can squeeze it back.
Oh, that's so nice.
So this is really great, and he's on his way. But it's interesting because the family doesn't have total security. The father has got a job, and it's possible he will get a work contract that will suffice for him to apply for residency through work rather than as a refugee. And I think that there's that hopefulness in the family, and that's probably why he's feeling, this boy is sensing in the atmosphere in the home that there's hope. As for the 2 Yazidi girls, they are the same, unfortunately. And the elder, you saw maybe her eyes moving a little. I don't think her eyes are, I think she's really out now.
Oh, thank you.
So I just want to ask you both, because you're parents, right? And I'm not a parent, but I can only imagine, watching this firsthand as parents, watching kids go through this. You got to think about your own kids, and I'm wondering if the overall just making of this film ever kind of took, and maybe this is too personal a question, but like any kind of emotional toll on you.
Well, I'll cry at commercials on television. I'm a very emotional person. And I've worked a lot as an editor, and a lot of times I edit by my reactions to the material, my emotional reactions to the material. What I would say is that now I sit here today and watch that thing, and I start getting a little, I react emotionally. And I think that is very much related to being a parent. I think that it's just simply, I think anyone can emotionally react to certain stories, but I think this particular story would resonate a little more with a parent. I think it did for us, yes.
I would just say that I agree with John, but I would also say that as a grandparent, because we have these little grandsons, one of the grandsons is the same age as Daria when she got sick. And for me, when sometimes I'm looking at my grandsons and I get really choked up because I'm thinking about how these children are lying in bed for months and over a year, and it's really hard. But while we were there and working with the families, they needed us to be strong. I mean, empathetic, yes, but we have to keep it together because they're already going through hell. And in fact, we need to be a bit of support to them in a way. So we held it together.
Were there any times where you felt like you were there, you're intruding, where you had to like turn the camera off and just leave them for a while?
Oh, we did that actually a lot. There were times when, we'd drive 2 hours one way and then check in to see if it was okay if we came by, because we'd made an arrangement, and the mother would say, I'm just exhausted, I didn't sleep last night, because they're doing stuff all night, they're sleeping during the day, and so we turn around and go back. And that would happen sometimes. And then while we were there, we really tried to, have a small footprint, because we felt we needed to. So that, you can feel the stress in those apartments. I mean, these people are just traumatized. And for us to be there, I mean, this is a common problem, I think, with making a documentary film in a situation like that, where you're intruding. I mean, you can't get around the fact you're intruding, and that made it difficult. And you just have to tell yourself that you've been over it with them, you've talked to, you've got trust with them, and there's some good that's going to come out of this. And we would just try to tread very softly. It was just the two of us. We specifically came up with a very small camera and sound package. Our lighting kit was the windows and a Chinese lantern from IKEA, which we put a household bulb in to supplement. So we were very light. We'd walk in with a backpack and a tripod case and a bag of sound equipment, and that was pretty much, and cookies or fruit, and that was pretty much it. And I think that actually was something we could do to sort of like not be as intrusive as we might otherwise be.
So what? This isn't on Netflix yet, right? It's going to be
June 14th.
June 14th. Okay, so everyone, tell everyone on your social media channel to view this film, support this film any way you possibly can. Just because it's on Netflix doesn't mean like everybody knows about it. This is something you really have to get the word out on. So thank you so much for coming. You were given a ballot on the way in, so please vote in the audience award. Stick around, because after this we have another documentary called Our Time Machine, and we have the director here for that as well.
It's really
Can I
good.
just say, we saw Our Time Machine at the Docklands Festival 2 weeks ago. It's fantastic.
It is.
So if you could stay, it's so good.
Yeah, it's great. Okay, John and Kristine, thank you so much for coming.
Thank you.
Thank you all for coming.